Canada eyes joining Trump's $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense plan, sparking backlash from China.
A new Statistics Canada report reveals that the consumer carbon tax was in fact contributing to Canada's rising inflation.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre intends to launch an economic growth council to make recommendations to Parliament on how to reverse Canada's ailing financial performance. Hello Canada, it's Thursday, May 22nd, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Isaac Lamoureux.
And I'm Noah Jarvis.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Canada has expressed interest in participating in U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed $175 billion missile defense system dubbed the Golden Dome, a move that has drawn criticism from China. Trump announced he selected the architecture for the Golden Dome land, sea, and space missile defense system during a Tuesday press conference at the White House, where he signaled that Canada was interested. Trump said, quote, "Canada has called us, and they want to be a part of it, so we'll be talking to them. They want to have protection also, so as usual, we help Canada and do the best we can." The Prime Minister's office confirmed it is engaged in ongoing discussions about Canada's potential involvement in the defense project, cautioning that nothing has been finalized. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Mark Carney said the discussions were part of Canada's interest in bolstering North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, capabilities. Trump said the Golden Dome, named after the Iron Dome missile defense system America helped build in Israel, should be fully operational by the end of Trump's second term in 3 years. He said his latest bill will include $25 billion for the Golden Dome. However, he estimated the project would cost $175 billion once completed, a price tag he said Canada would help pay. Trump said, quote, "We'll be discussing Canada. They want to hook in, and they want to see if they can be a part of it." That sort of makes sense, I guess. That's what I was talking about from day one. You know, it just automatically makes sense, and it won't be very difficult to do, but they'll pay their fair share. Some critics estimated the build would likely take more than 3 years, and others said the cost of the project would likely exceed Trump's claimed $175 billion price tag. Helping fund this project could help Canada achieve its NATO commitment of spending 2% of its GDP on defense. According to the Chinese Communist Party-run Global Times, China has warned the U.S. to abandon its Golden Dome missile defense system, saying it will, quote, "heighten the risks of space militarization and an arms race." So, Noah, how does Carney's latest stance towards the U.S. and President Donald Trump compare to what he was saying on the campaign trail?
Well, it's definitely a change of pace from what Mark Carney has been saying on the campaign trail. If you recall, just a couple months ago, Mark Carney was telling all Canadians that we have to redefine our relationship with the United States because of the current administration up in the White House. Mark Carney was talking about how Canada needs to reorient its economy away from the United States and to develop defense relationships with other countries like the United Kingdom, like France, like Germany, other European countries, Japan, and reorient away from reliance on the United States. But as we've seen in Mark Carney's few months in the prime ministership, specifically after the election, he has taken a markedly different tone when it comes to dealing with the United States, especially when he is talking to the president. And then, you know, he has a different tone when he's talking to the media. When he's talking to the media, he continues to boast his rhetoric on standing up to the United States, standing up to the tariff threats, and committing to bolstering Canada's defense independent of the United States. However, joining in this commitment to create the Golden Dome, as Trump calls it, would be quite the opposite. If the United States really represented such a grave threat as Prime Minister Carney had been demonstrating to Canadians over the past few months, it is a bit strange to further integrate Canada's defense commitments with the United States to help the United States develop this Golden Dome system. I think most Canadians would agree that having a weapons technology that could make Canada next to impervious to incoming missiles and rockets, especially coming from space, I think Canadians would agree that that's a good idea. But to have a system that has been developed in concert with the United States and to have a system that potentially could be turned on and off by a American administration, current or future, would have those elbows up Canadians really concerned, really worried that the United States could have leverage over Canada's defense and its ability to defend itself from incoming attacks. But Mark Carney doesn't really seem to be demonstrating this fear, demonstrating the sort of elbows up mentality. He is furthering Canada's defense commitments with the United States. And perhaps this is the right thing to do. Perhaps that Canada is always destined to further integrate its economy, further integrate its defense policy and the weapon systems that it uses with the United States. But it is certainly a different tone from what Prime Minister Carney took on the campaign trail. Canada's inflation rate fell in April, driven in part by the lowering of the consumer carbon tax rate to $0 during the election campaign. However, while energy prices steeply decreased, other industries like food weren't as lucky, and prices skyrocketed due to Prime Minister Mark Carney's counter tariffs and ongoing industrial carbon tax. The data released by Statistics Canada on Monday highlighted that Canada's consumer price index rose by 1.7% annually in April compared to a 2.3% annual increase seen in March. This means that the average price of goods still increased yearly, just at a slower pace. After the price of energy fell 1.6% in March, it plummeted to an 18.1% yearly decrease in April. The report reads, quote, "The price decrease in April was mainly driven by the removal of the consumer carbon price." Similarly, the price of natural gas fell 14.1% in April, following a 6.4% annual increase in March, a shift the report also credited to the removal of the consumer carbon tax. While Carney claimed to cancel the carbon tax, a carbon pricing scheme law remains in place and can only be axed through a majority vote in Parliament. Conservative MP Andrew Scheer highlighted the irony of legacy media reporting on the carbon tax's contribution to reducing inflation and downplaying its impact for so long. For years, the Liberals also maintained that the consumer carbon tax played no real role in driving inflation. After ceasing collection on their provincial carbon levies in early 2024, Saskatchewan and Manitoba had already seen the benefits of removing the carbon tax, as their inflation fell much quicker than other provinces. By keeping the taxes off, their inflation rose at nearly half the rate of the rest of the country in 2024. In April 2025, inflation rose more slowly in 9 of 10 provinces. While the price of energy fell drastically, food prices continued to increase faster than any other industry, with a 3.8% increase annually. So, Isaac, did the legacy media and politicians ever acknowledge that the carbon tax was contributing to inflation before Carney reduced the consumer portion?
Well, Noah, that's a great question. So I basically did a Google search and compiled some of what legacy media said regarding carbon tax and its relation to inflation in the past. So I'll list a few headers and publications, so hopefully you can get the idea. Carbon tax had negligible impact on inflation, new study says, CBC. Study links inflation to global factors, not carbon tax. Wealth professional. Carbon pricing has only a tiny impact on inflation, economists. Canada's National Observer. Trudeau government's carbon price has had minimal effect on inflation and food costs, study concludes. Toronto Star. I could go on, but you get the gist. As for the studies and experts assisting these articles, you can conduct very poor studies, for example, with a univariate analysis of a multivariate problem, or experts with extreme bias. For example, looking at another CBC article titled, "The Consumer Carbon Tax is Gone as of Today. What will that mean for your wallet?" The article contained various things that could be interpreted as untrue. For example, the lead sentence said Carney canceled the carbon tax, which of course at face value is not true at all. Carney said he canceled the carbon tax, which of course is a lie because he can't cancel the carbon tax, as you mentioned, Noah. The only possible way to do that is through a majority vote in Parliament. Next, that article featured an expert from the University of Alberta, Andrew Leach, who was suggesting similar lies that the Liberal government peddled over the last few years, suggesting that people would be worse off due to losing the carbon tax rebates. He said that lower income households would see a net negative after losing the rebates, an easily verifiable lie, especially when calculating the true cost of the carbon tax among the line of distribution, which most analyses to be fair, fail to even begin to comprehend. And this is again, of course, after the parliamentary budget officer reported time and again that Canadian households were paying more than they received in rebates, which True North reported repeatedly. Still, we saw left wing pundits and legacy media continue in their lie, saying that 8 out of 10 households are somehow better off, despite such a claim defying basic common sense. This was after True North reported repeatedly, as you mentioned, Noah, that provinces that removed their carbon taxes, notably Saskatchewan and Manitoba, consistently had lower inflation than the rest of the country. So while legacy media and left wing politicians have been peddling lies about the carbon tax for years, True North has been consistent in its messaging, and this messaging is now confirmed and verifiably true. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre announced the formation of an economic growth council to help identify the root causes of Canada's poor financial performance and propose solutions for the future. The leader's economic growth council aims to identify the economy's root problems and propose practical solutions with two primary objectives. The first is to, quote, bring back greater buying power with earnings that rise faster than prices so Canadians get better living standards. And the second is to provide more growth to fund stronger defense and borders and better social programs. The council will be chaired by MP Greg McLean, who represents the riding of Calgary Centre, and co-chaired by Kapuskasking Timmins Mushkugowak MP Gaetan Millette, as well as former MP Rick Perkins. Council members plan to make consultations across various business sectors, labor organizations, stakeholders, nonprofits, and speak with policy analysts to gather data and present feedback. Its members will be selected from a wide range of sectors and regions, from Indigenous leaders to entrepreneurs and innovators from both private and nonprofit industries. A presentation of the Council's findings will be presented at the 2026 Conservative Party National Convention and will also be discussed in Parliament. The primary goal of the report is to, quote, unleash the country's full economic potential and bring it back from its position as the economic laggard of the developed world. So, Noah, is there anything in Poilievre's 2025 federal platform that may indicate areas the council might hone in on for further study?
Well, I think the 2025 conservative platform was interesting in that not only did it present a bunch of policies that the conservatives wanted to implement, but they also decided that they would like to bring in a task force that would reform taxes, specifically called the Tax Reform Task Force. And in the conservative platform, the party decided that this task force would look over four key points, that being a tax cut that rewards work and saving, a tax code that closes loopholes for the wealthy and well-connected, eliminates unnecessary red tape, and makes it easier for Canadians to file and understand their taxes. Now that the Conservatives are in opposition and they don't have the burden of governing the country, the task force likely will look a little different, would likely be attuned toward the needs of an opposition party who has to hold the current Liberal government to account rather than implement policy for all Canadians. But at the end of the day, there are some key points that this task force needs to hit on, as commentators and Canadians for several months and years have been talking about these issues, specifically being Canada's failure to grow its economy. GDP per capita growth has basically been stagnant for a decade. And you also have to look at Canada's issue with productivity. Productivity in the past 3 to 4 years has actually not been stagnant, but on the decline. This means that Canada's workers are producing less quantity of items, of services per hour. So these problems are the things that are ailing Canada's economy, holding Canada back from becoming an economic superpower. And a lot of the solutions that the task force will have to recommend will be involving tax cuts and regulatory reform, as Canada has some of the higher taxes for the middle class across any country in the world. And this, it really does inhibit the ability of middle class families to spend and to throw money back into the economy. We also see the problem with a failure of employment growth in the private sector, and most of the employment growth, when looking at jobs numbers, is in government positions. The government continues to get bigger while the private sector continues to remain the same size or even contract. And when it comes to regulatory reform, I mean, the Trudeau government was notorious for bringing in new regulations, bringing in laws that would set out whole new regulatory parameters and dynamics. They decided that they would sidestep a Harper government law that would require the government to eliminate a regulation for each new regulation they bring in. Yet the Trudeau government, they decide to encompass several sub-regulations under one giant regulatory framework in order to increase the regulatory burden. Now we know that the Conservatives said that they would be slashing the amount of regulations by 25% if they had formed government. But now that they have more time in opposition, and now that they have time to do this study, to conduct this task force, they can go into the details, the nitty gritty, into what regulatory reform will look like, what regulations need to be scrapped entirely because they're outdated, or because they restrict building or restrict entrepreneurs from establishing their businesses, and which regulations need to be reformed in order to properly deliver the results that the regulation is set out to deliver. And just in general, I know that many Canadians are peeved that they have to give up so much of a large percentage of their income compared to, say, Americans who then would just move to the United States in order to pursue a higher income with lower taxes in a regulatory environment that is less burdensome to entrepreneurs. And to have Canada a laggard in this area definitely contributes to many of the economic woes that Canada has, the outflow of investment from the Canadian economy into the United States. So these are many of the areas that the Conservative platform needs to hone in on and to deliver some solutions for Canadians so that they can then go back to Canadian voters in 2026, 2027. 2029 is when the election date is scheduled to happen next. So perhaps you can take some of these policies, deliver them to Canadians in a solid communicative package, and then potentially dethrone the Liberals and prevent them from winning a fifth term.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.